We can't know for sure why he did it. The man they called the Phantom Killer was never caught, though. He was never put on trial. He never sat down and explained the thoughts in his head. So we are left with pieces. We have the crimes themselves. We have the place and the time. We have theories from people who study these things, and by looking at all of it, we can get closer to an answer. The real answer is probably a mix of things. It is never just one reason. To understand the attacks, you have to understand Texarkana in 1946. The war was over. The whole country felt like it could finally breathe again. Soldiers were coming home, getting jobs, and starting families. There was a feeling of hope, of getting back to normal, and part of that normal, especially for young people, was dating. Young cars were a huge part of life. A car meant freedom. It meant you could get away from your parents. You could be alone with your boyfriend or girlfriend. All over America, towns had these secluded spots. They called them lovers' lanes. It was just a quiet road, maybe out by a park or in the woods. A place where you could park the car, listen to the radio, and just be together. It was innocent. It was what kids did. Texarkana had several of these spots. They felt safe. They were part of the fabric of the town. This is the world the Phantom walked into. A world of optimism and innocence. He chose to attack that world at its most vulnerable point. He chose to attack couples. Let's look at the attacks themselves. They tell a story. The first one was in February. A young couple, Jimmy Hollis and Mary Johnny Larry, were parked on a secluded road. A man appeared at the car window. He had a flashlight and a gun. He ordered them out of the car. He told Jimmy to take off his pants. Then he beat Jimmy with the gun. He fractured his skull. He told Mary Jean to run. When she didn't run fast enough, he knocked her down and attacked her. But they both survived. They were the lucky ones. This first attack gives us a blueprint. The target is a couple. The location is isolated. The weapon is a gun, but he also uses it as a blunt object. There is an element of control and sexual assault. He wants to humiliate the man and terrorize the woman. He wants power. He could have killed them, but he didn't. Maybe he was just starting. Maybe he was testing himself. A month later, it happened again. Another couple, Richard Griffin and Polly Ann Moore, were found dead in their parked car on a lover's lane. Both had been shot in the back of the head. This was different. This was an escalation. The Phantom had moved from assault to murder. He was more confident now. He was more comfortable with killing. But the core of the attack was the same. A young couple alone in a car in the dark. He found them in their private moment and destroyed them. The town started to panic. This wasn't a random robbery. This was something else. Something personal and terrifying. The police told people to be careful. They told them to stay away from the dark, quiet road. But the killer wasn't done. 3 weeks after that, it was Easter weekend. Paul Martin and Betty Jo Booker were out on a date. Betty Jo was a talented saxophone player. She had just played a gig with her band. Paul picked her up. They went for a drive. They never came home. Paul's body was found by the side of a road. He had been shot 4 times. Betty Jo's body was found miles away behind a tree. She had been shot twice. This attack showed more planning. The killer moved the victims. He separated them. The crime scene was more complex. It suggests he was spending more time with his victim. He was in control for longer. The terror lasted longer. He was evolving. He was becoming more organized. The weapon used, a .32 Colt automatic pistol, was now a signature. The police knew they were dealing with the same man. Texarkana was no longer just panicked. It was terrified. The optimism of 1946 was gone. In its place was a constant gnawing fear. People bought guns, they put locks on their doors and bars on their windows. When the sun went down, the streets emptied. The town that dreaded sundown. That's what they called it. The Phantom had single-handedly shut down the city's nightlife. He had stolen their sense of safety, and then he did something that broke the pattern. In early May, he attacked again, but this time it wasn't a young couple in a car. It was a married couple in their own home. Virgil and Katie Starks lived on a farmhouse just outside of town. The killer shot Virgil through the window of their living room. He shot him twice in the back of the head as he sat in his armchair. Katie woke up to the sound. She ran to the phone to call for help, but the killer shot her twice in the face. Somehow, she survived. She ran from the house, bleeding, to get help from a neighbor. This attack confuses things. Why change the pattern? Why attack an older married couple in their home? Some people think it wasn't the Phantom. They think it was a copycat or a completely different crime. But the ballistics seemed to match. It was likely the same gun. So why the change? Maybe he couldn't find a couple on a lover's lane. The police were patrolling them heavily. The kids were too scared to go out there anymore. He had effectively shut down his own hunting grounds, so he had to find his victim somewhere else. A remote farmhouse might have seemed just as isolated. Just as vulnerable, he looked through the window and saw what he was looking for, a couple together in a private moment. The core target was the same, even if the location changed. He was still attacking the idea of the couple. So we come back to the main question, why? Why couples? The easiest answer is about opportunity. Lovers' lanes were perfect hunting grounds. The victims were isolated, they were distracted. Their guard was down, they were focused on each other, not on the darkness outside the car windows. It was a low-risk, high-reward situation for a predator. He didn't have to break into a house, at least not at first. He didn't have to confront someone in a public place, he just had to wait in the shadows for a car to pull up. It was a practical choice. But it was more than just practical. The choice of victim says something about the killer. It reveals his psychology. Attacking couples is not the same as attacking a single person. It is a specific kind of violation. One theory is that the attacks were driven by sexual sadism. A sexual sadist gets pleasure from the suffering of others. The fear, the pain, the humiliation of the victims is the point of the crime. For a killer like this, a couple offers a more complex and satisfying scenario. He gets to control two people at once. He can play them against each other. He can terrorize the woman by hurting the man in front of her. In the first attack, he made Jimmy Hollis take off his pants before beating. That was about humiliation. It was about stripping him of his masculinity. He was showing the woman that her protector was helpless. That he, the killer, was the one in charge. The man was the obstacle. The man had to be dealt with first. In most of the attacks, the male victim was killed or incapacitated immediately. This left the female victim alone, and completely at the killer's mercy. This sequence of events, neutralize the man, terrorize the woman with her, is a common script for sexual predators. It is about total domination. The act of turning a moment of intimacy into a moment of horror is a profound display of power. He takes something beautiful and private and twists it into something ugly and violent. That transformation itself is likely part of the thrill for him. Another powerful motive is rage, specifically rage born from envy and rejection. The Phantom was likely a man who felt like an outsider. He saw other people living normal lives, falling in love, being happy, and he couldn't have it. Maybe he was physically unattractive, maybe he was socially awkward, maybe he had been rejected by women his whole life. Whatever the reason, he felt cheated. So when he saw a couple parked in a car, he didn't just see two people. He saw everything he didn't have. He saw intimacy, connection, and a future, and he hated it. His attacks were a way to destroy that happiness. If he couldn't have it, nobody could. It was an act of profound spite. He was lashing out at the very symbol of his own failure and loneliness. By killing them, he was momentarily silencing the part of himself that felt so inadequate. This connects to the idea of power and control. Serial killers often feel powerless in their everyday lives. They might have a dead-end job. They might live with their parents. They might feel invisible to the rest of the world. But when they are committing their crimes, they are in complete control. They are the ones making the rules. They decide who lives and who dies. For the Texarkana Phantom, this feeling of power must have been intoxicating. He wasn't just some guy anymore. He was the Phantom. He was a terrifying, almost supernatural figure. The entire city was afraid of him. He could read about himself in the newspapers. He could hear people whispering his name. He had made a mark on the world. He mattered. Attacking couples amplified this feeling. He wasn't just controlling one person's destiny, he was controlling two. He was breaking the most fundamental human bond. It made him feel like a god. Let's think about the main suspect. The police and the Texas Rangers worked the case hard. A famous ranger named M.T. Lone Wolf Gonzalez was brought in. They chased down hundreds of leads. But one suspect has always stood out, Youell Swinney. Swinney was a career criminal. He was a car thief, a counterfeiter, a violent man. He had a long history of assaults. And his wife, who was with him at the time of the murders, later gave a detailed confession to the police. She said he was the killer. She described the murders. Her story matched details that only the killer could know. But then she changed her mind. She refused to testify against him. Under Texas law at the time, a wife could not be forced to testify against her husband. Without her testimony, the case against him for murder was weak. They convicted him of car theft and sent him to prison for a long time, but he was never tried for the Phantom killings. If Swinney was the killer, does his profile fit? In some ways, yes. He was a violent, impulsive man. He had a history of abusing his wife. He certainly had the capacity for this kind of brutality. His crimes were often clumsy and reckless, which matches the chaos of some of the scenes. He represented a kind of social failure, a man on the margins of society filled with rage. It is easy to imagine a man like Swinney feeling a deep resentment toward happy, well-adjusted young couples. He was the opposite of the clean-cut young men he was killing. They had futures. He had a rap sheet. The attacks on couples might have been his way of getting revenge on a world that he felt had rejected him. He saw these young men with their pretty girlfriends and their nice cars. He saw them as symbols of the life he was denied. So, he took it from them, he took their cars, he took their lives, but the theory of Youell Swinney doesn't explain everything. Some aspects of the crime seem more calculated and cunning than you would expect from a small-time crook like him. The way the killer seemed to disappear into the night, leaving almost no clues. The way he created a legend around himself. This has led some to believe the killer was someone else. Someone smarter, more organized, maybe someone who lived in the town and knew its back roads perfectly. Regardless who he was, his choice of victims remains the most telling detail. He wasn't just killing people, he was killing couples. He was attacking an idea. The idea of love, the idea of normalcy, the idea of a happy future. Each attack was a performance. The lover's lane was his stage. The car was the centerpiece. The couple was the cast. He was the director of a play about terror and despair. He wanted to show the world and himself that love is fragile, that safety is an illusion, that he, the Phantom, had the power to turn a scene of tenderness into a scene of butchery. The attack on the Starks farmhouse fits this pattern if you see it through this lens. He looked through the window and saw a husband and wife in their home, the ultimate symbol of domestic stability. He saw the same thing he saw in the cars on the lover's lanes, a unit of two people bound together. And he felt the same impulse to destroy it. So, why did he do it? He did it because couples were easy targets. They were vulnerable and isolated, making the mechanics of the attack simpler. He did it for the sadistic pleasure of it. The act of controlling two people, of turning their intimacy into terror, was the ultimate source of his gratification. He enjoyed their fear. He did it out of a deep, burning rage. He was a man filled with envy for the happiness and connection he saw in others, a connection he felt he could never have himself. His violence was a way to smash the mirror that showed him his own reflection as a failure. And he did it for the feeling of power. In his normal life, he was likely a nobody. But in the dark, with a gun in his hand, he was the Phantom. He was a figure of immense power, holding the life of an entire town in his hands. He was more than a man. He was a monster, a legend. And a monster's power is measured by the amount of fear it can create. By attacking the core of the community, its young people, its families, its sense of hope, he created the most fear possible. The Texarkana Phantom's reign of terror was short. It lasted only 10 weeks. Then, as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. The attack stopped. No one knows if he was arrested for another crime like Swinney was, or if he moved away, or if he died, or if he simply decided to stop, but he left a scar on the town that never really healed. He changed the way people saw the world. The dark wasn't just dark anymore, it held a potential threat. A quiet country road wasn't just a place for a peaceful drive, it was a place where something terrible could happen. He took away that feeling of post-war innocence. He proved that even in a small, friendly town, a deep and terrible darkness could be waiting right outside your car door or right outside your window. And his focus on couples was his signature. It was the key to his method, his motivation, and his terrifying legacy. He was the lover's lane predator, and his message was simple and brutal: no one is safe, and nothing is sacred.